Okay, welcome to this evening's webinar. Excuse me. Getting to know the family division judges of Essex County. You have to excuse me. I have a sore throat, so I may have some trouble with the presentation tonight, but I'm going to do my best. Let me tell you a little bit about what to expect from today's webinar. It's scheduled for 45 minutes. Sometimes it goes a little longer, sometimes it's a little shorter, but my goal is to keep it within that time. This is a one-way communication, so you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. There is a little control panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in questions throughout the webinar that I will do my best to answer at the end. People may come in and out of the webinar, so it usually does not distract, but if you come in late, I'm also going to email out a copy of the recording, which leads me to my next point, that this is being recorded. So if you have issues that you may have missed or something that you weren't clear about, you will get a copy of this usually in the next week or so. I will stay as long as it's needed to answer any questions you may have. There is a box in your control panel that will allow you to post questions. I usually recommend you do it throughout the webinar instead of waiting until the very end so that you don't forget what you wanted to ask. I believe that nobody else will see the questions that you post, so you don't have to worry about any kind of confidentiality. So a little bit about the webinar too before we get into the basics of it. As I said, the title is Get to Know the Family Court Division Judges in Essex County. I think it's important, if you have a case, to know as much as you can about the judge. Now, there's not going to be any great secrets that I'm going to impart upon you, nothing that, you're going to give you some great advantage. But I think just knowing the judges, having a little bit of background on them, knowing what to expect when you walk in, may do a great deal to help you through your cases. Now, also, this is just based on my experience. I mean, I did do some research into their background. I'll try to give you a little bit of information that I've gained over the years. But obviously, nothing's going to give you any kind of advantage or favorable decisions. It's really just to help you kind of get through a difficult process. You'll often hear people that are upset with their judges. You'll read things on the internet about people post about judges. Somebody's always going to be unhappy with a judge's decision. It's rare that any decision is going to favor both parties. So just because somebody may say something bad about a judge or even about your judge doesn't necessarily mean it's true, and doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the same experience. And just to keep in mind, it's not an easy job being a judge. They're forced to make very difficult decisions about very important issues in your life with very little information and very little time to do it. So they do their best, but they will often almost routinely tell you that you should not let a judge make your decisions, and yet you should make them for you. Only you know what you need. Only you know the facts of your situation. A judge cannot know your case as well as you do. They're often reluctant to make decisions and only do it when they have no other choice. They would prefer a case settle and the parties make their own decision. There is also a lot of changes in Essex County recently, maybe even statewide. A lot of judges have recently retired, and many judges have been appointed. So there's been sort of a changing of the guard. So some of the judges in the county may not have as much experience with your cases as some of the other judges in the past who have retired. I also won't have as much experience with some of these new judges, so there's less information I have to give you about that. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on me in case you don't know me. My name is Brad Micklin. I am the managing member of the Micklin Law Group. I've been practicing law for a little shy of 20 years now. I am licensed to practice in both New Jersey and Pennsylvania state bars, as well as state and federal courts. I started my career as a judicial law clerk for the Honorable Eugene H in the special civil part of Bergen County. I did that for a year. It's a 1-year position, which was an invaluable position in that you got to see sort of what happens behind the closed doors, what judges do and don't do, what they do and don't like. Very good experience. Lasted for a year. I then went to do complex commercial litigation in Clifton at Kessler Associates. I found after a couple of years I didn't really like representing companies and corporations. I wanted to have clients and personal relationships. So I transitioned from the complex commercial litigation into my own practice in 2001. At that time, I was a general practice attorney and a solo practitioner, which means I did a little bit of everything by myself. Um, Shortly thereafter, I realized you can't be good at everything, so I concentrated my practice into divorce, family law, and estate planning and litigation, which is where it is today. I formed the Micklin Law Group in, I think it was 2010 or 2011. I brought in a couple of associates, Rachel Isaacs, who is our senior associate, Richard Nuglia, who is our junior associate. We recently added Alyssa Musso, who is serving as our paralegal, but she is an attorney waiting on her licensing and bar results. We have Carmen Figueroa, who is our client service manager, and various administrative staff to help sort of behind the scenes. The firm is concentrated in divorce, family law, and estate planning litigation. My concentration is more the high conflict and high net worth cases. So moving right into the information, Judge Floria is the first judge we're going to talk about. She's been a judge for about 16 years now, 14 of that in the family division. She is the presiding judge of the family division, which means she sort of supervises the other judges, and I think she's also in charge of the scheduling of which judges get what cases, or at least how that process works. You will see on the right-hand side, she has a extensive history in volunteer work that's related to the family court. She's been on the National Council of Juvenile Family Court. She's worked on the improvement committee of the family division presiding judges. She's worked on children and court committees. It's very important to take note of that. I think that her past and probably current activities show her commitment to the family court, to both its improvement in the bench, meaning the judges, as well as the practice. I think that's very important. My experience with her is, she does care a great deal about her case. She does take a lot of time to put the special attention into the matters that are needed. You'll see in her prior experience, she was in private practice in 1981 through 98. The partner, I believe, was actually her husband. I just think she went by her maiden name, which, whether or not I'm right, I think that suggests, the family's important. She obviously, at least then, has a good relationship. You'll see also before that she served as a prosecutor. Now, you'll see this in a lot of the judges that we're going to cover today. And on the one hand, you could think it may suggest maybe a sort of mentality of a prosecutor or a sort of police officer into law and order. A lot of times you'll hear a prosecutor say things like, false in one, false in all, which means if you lied about one thing, you might lie about another. So, this might lead you to think that Judge Floria, for instance, may have some of that background or influence, which it could have. I don't know, but I do know that a lot of judges have this background. I think it may be commonly part of just a stepping stone into a judgeship. There obviously is some political background to becoming a judge because it's a political appointment and not an elected position. So I'm not sure whether or not being a prosecutor makes much of a difference or not, but you will see that there is that background. It is, I think, important just to keep in mind. And I think that she handles FD cases. And when I say cases by letters, that means the letters of the docket number. FD is family and non-dissolution, which means it's everything but divorces and DIFAS cases, or DCP, Division of Child Protective Services. So FD cases are generally child support, parenting time, maybe spousal support for married couples, but not divorces and not, although she may do the DCP cases. I don't think so. I think she has in the past. I'm just not sure if she's still doing it. I know she did many years ago because those were the cases I had with her, but I don't know if she's still handling those cases or not. Next is Judge Stephen Bernstein. He's been a judge for about 13 years now, I believe, always in the family division. One thing I noticed in my research of him, if you notice under his education, he has an MBA from NYU before getting his Juris Doctorate degree, which is the legal degree, the law degree. I think that's important. I mean, I think it shows that he values education. And, if you ever happen to have an issue like about college contribution or private school, may be good knowing that he does value education. It may be a point to sort of use in your support. He started, I think, doing civil cases quick when he was first appointed, even though it says in the family division. I don't think he stayed there very long, and then he was moved right into family. You'll see in his prior experience, I researched the firm that he was with. That it's a very large firm, I believe, and it has a very diverse practice. So I really wasn't able to find out what his legal practice background was because it was such a diverse firm. But my guess is that it's more of a civil background, civil meaning everything that's not family and everything that's not estate related. But I'm really not sure. Currently, he is presiding over adoption matters and the DCP, which is the Division of Child Placement, formerly known as DIFAS. I will probably refer to them as DIFAS throughout this, so I apologize if there's any confusion, but that's just how I know the organization. In addition to that, he does not do divorces, but ironically, he did my divorce. And yes, I was divorced in Essex County. My experience with him, and obviously I have personal and professional experience with him to that extent, is he's very easy to deal with. But what I liked about him was he gets right to the point. It's almost like he just stares right through you and gets right to the point, and that's good, especially in a divorce case, especially in a case like my divorce, which was your quintessential nasty, ugly divorce. Obviously not because of my doing, but and he was good with it. He didn't let things get too out of control or too far away from the issues, and he kept everybody on point, which was appreciated on my part, and I think very helpful. So, if you find yourself going before him, I think you'll have a pretty good experience there also. Judge Michael Casale, he's been sitting on the bench for about 18 years. I also believe always in the family part. He recently began, well, not recently, probably now a couple of years ago, started doing divorces. I think before he was doing like the FD matters, the non-dissolution that I described earlier. He replaced the position of Judge Thomas Zampino, who was sitting in Essex for many, many years, probably decades actually. He recently retired, so Judge Casale was elevated to take over, I think, his cases. You'll see in his background, he worked for a fairly local firm, Cassione, Pomaco, and Beck, and I think they're in Belleville. I do not believe that firm does family law. At least I'm pretty sure at the time that Judge Casale was there that they did not do family law matters. So I think his background was probably everything but family, which isn't unusual. It is not unusual that a judge may be put into a position where they were not actually practicing that position as attorneys. There's obviously extensive education both when they take over sitting at the bar, and then every year there's a judicial conference or college that they attend to educate. So you need not worry if the judge you have doesn't have a practice background in your area. They are well educated in both the law and the procedure, so you don't need to worry about it. But going back to his experience, not only was he in the firm he was in Belleville, but he was a Bloomfield councilman for many years and township attorney. So I would believe then he got very strong ties to the areas, at least into the Belleville, Bloomfield areas, which may or may not make any difference if you happen to be from there. But again, these are just things that are good to know about the judge if you happen to go before him. I have a lot of experience with Judge Casale's cases, even though he's only been sitting there a short period in comparison to the practice time that I've had in Essex, meaning when he took over Judge Zampino's position. But always had good experiences with him. He's always accommodates you if you have some kind of special need or issue that you need to address. He will do usually his best to avoid formal procedures if something can be simply addressed, which is kind of common for a lot of judges too. But in my experience, Judge Casale will go out of his way to help you accomplish things like that. Judge Claude Coleman He's been sitting on the bench for about 12 years. I had many cases with him many years ago when he was sitting doing divorces, but he's sort of been shifted around now. I still think he's doing divorces, but for some reason, I have not had many of mine assigned to him. So I don't have any recent experience. As far as my personal experience with him, he was always, again, very easygoing, mild mannered, soft spoken. And I say that because although it's not up here in his prior experience, but he was, I believe, um, previously a police officer and the head of the Newark Fire and Police Departments. He was also in private practice. I think the majority of his career. I don't know if that was before or after these positions, but when I read that about his background, it was kind of surprising because I always imagined police officers and people that were head of the police and fire departments being well, at least let me say, not being soft spoken and well mannered. And Judge Coleman is precisely just like that. He's always respectful and easy to deal with. I'd never recall having any problems or my clients having any problems with cases before him. Like I said, I'm not really sure if he's doing divorces or not. I'd almost think that he's not because I don't have any that get assigned to him. I'm just unfortunately not really sure what he's doing or what kinds of cases he's having. So maybe someone could shoot me a message if they happen to have or had Judge Coleman so I could update my notes for you. Judge Wayne Forrest was appointed in 2012 by Governor Christie. You'll see there's a few that are going to be in this webinar that are new appointees. That goes to, there was a period of time, not many years ago, I think it was maybe about 3 years ago, where there was a little political pull between the judicial members and Governor Christie, where I'm not exactly sure if people blocked Christie's appointments or what it was, but Christie wasn't appointing judges, and judges put a freeze on trials. Now, it was justified by saying they didn't have enough judges, but nonetheless, nobody got any trials. That was actually the time my divorce came into Essex County. So putting a freeze on my case caused my case as well and other divorces to last years because people just, if you didn't settle, you didn't get a trial date. Nonetheless, so there's a lot of new judges. Judge Forrest is one of them. I have had a couple cases with this judge. Very polite, very respectful. Which I also found a little ironic when I did my research. His prior experience is in the head authority of Passaic Valley Sewage Commission to weed out corruption. Again, that would just lead me to think you might have somebody that's a little more harsh and into a law and order type of character. And I don't mean the show. I mean, but somebody who's steadfast believer in maintaining law and order. And my experience with him is not like that. I found that he's very, very courteous and very easy to deal with. He also has a background as a prosecutor. Again, that may or may not have an influence on his personality or not, but he's currently, I believe, doing what's called FV cases, which is family and domestic violence. So those are temporary and permanent restraining order hearings. Next is Judge Robert Hanna. He is basically brand new. He was appointed in 2014 by Governor Christie. I unfortunately have no experience with Judge Hanna. I've never been in his courtroom. To my knowledge, I don't think me or my firm has any cases currently with him. So I apologize. There's really nothing I can impart about him. You have his background here. He worked as Chief of Securities and Health Fraud Unit at the U.S. Attorney General's Office. And again, the Attorney General's Office is a similar stepping stone that many judges take, similar to the prosecutor's office. But here, you have a director of law and assistant for the Attorney General, so he was there for some time. And then he's got a little background with the Board of Public Utilities, which is unique to other judges that I've researched. I don't think or can't really see how that is going to have much of an effect or influence on his demeanor or personality or kind of decisions he would make, but it can't hurt to know it. Again, if anybody that either is watching this or later gets a copy of this, if you have any information for Judge Hanna, I'd appreciate you sending it to me. It would help me to update my information so I can also let everybody know maybe for future webinars or such. Moving to Judge Craig Harris. He's been on the bench for about 23 years now. I believe, he retired in, I was going to say, I believe he's about to retire. I think he retires in 2017. For some reason, I thought he actually had retired and then was recalled, but I could be mistaken. My research doesn't show that, but I'm not sure. Either way, I think he is set soon to retire. His prior experience now, I've had chance to speak with him from time to time over the many years I've had cases before him. So my understanding, he was in a local practice, like a general practice attorney. Um, Here he was a municipal court judge in 82 through 91. I think again that was part of the stepping stones to becoming a judge. I don't know much more about his practice other than it was general. I know he enjoyed being in private practice a great deal. I'm sure he enjoys being a judge. He's been for decades now. Um, Always, again, good nature. I hate to sound like I'm repeating myself with every judge, but my experience with Judge Harris, he's always good natured. Usually has a smile on his face. Um, he gives you the respect that you need and the time to discuss whatever issues you have. So if you're going before Judge Harris, I don't really anticipate you'll have much difficulty with cases. Well, at least you shouldn't. I think he's doing FD cases, again, the non-dissolution child support parenting time cases. I've had some emergent applications go before him, orders to show causes, but that I think is just by chance because they rotate, I think, almost daily what judge actually handles those matters on those given days. Next is Judge Bruce Kaplan. Again, he is brand new, being appointed in 2014 by Judge Christie, or by Judge Christie, by Governor Christie. Again, I'm sorry, I've had no experience with Judge Kaplan. To my knowledge, I've never appeared in his court. I don't believe my firm has had cases with him. I could be mistaken because the name's vaguely familiar when I was doing the research, but I looked through our database and I couldn't find anything. Again, if anybody that is watching or does watch this has any information on Judge Kaplan, I appreciate you sending it to me. Maybe I could do something to send it out to people to update. So again, this is why I introduced in the beginning that there are a lot of new judges that unfortunately neither I nor most people will have much experience with because they're just simply brand new to the bench. Again, you see he's got a prosecutor background, he's director of criminal justice for a year. Judge Donald Kessler, he's been on the bench for about 10 years now. I have had the pleasure of having many cases before Judge Kessler, both divorces and FD cases, again, the child support visitation type of cases. You'll see in his prior experience, he was a commercial litigator for a number of years. Actually, apparently, I think maybe for all of his practice, but in just different areas. And this is consistent with my experience with him because, I've often received very complex, sometimes unique decisions from this judge on cases that usually involve financial issues. When it comes to divorces, for instance, most issues really are financial when you get away from a custody case, which most divorces don't carry into a custody. That's usually resolved by the parties or in an alternate dispute form. But I think the reason I've gotten these types of decisions from him is because of his commercial background. I think it gives him a unique view onto things and a different approach that maybe a lot of other judges may have. Right now, I believe he's doing divorces and the FD cases. He was for a long time just doing FD cases, again, the non-dissolution cases. And then when the many judges started to retire, I think he started receiving their caseloads. Next is Judge Ned Rosenberg. He's been on the bench for about 9 years. One thing I noticed interesting about his educational background is he went to Case Western Reserve, which up until the time that I did this, I never heard of that. I didn't even know what it was. Apparently, it's a private research university. And I mention that because I'm always trying to find a reason or something to impart upon the listeners that may help you if you have a given judge in a case. Now, on the one hand, this could be important because it might suggest some sort of inclination or interest that he has into research or maybe his mindset towards certain things. But the flip side is it's undergraduate, and a lot of people are make decisions when they're 18 and 19 that really have little, I don't want to say influence, but little to do with who they become much later in life. So maybe it's significant, maybe it's not. It's really hard to say, but again, something good to know. Again, I unfortunately don't have a great deal of experience with Judge Rosenberg. I have had a couple cases. I think they were domestic violence matters, so I didn't really have much interaction. Domestic violence matters usually trials, so they're decided that day, and then they're over. The order is not over, but the case itself is over. So, and I don't have much to share about Judge Rosenberg. I can tell you I haven't had any difficulties with him or any members of his staff, but I don't have much experience with his courtroom either. Next is Judge Louis Sceusi. Again, he's relatively new. He's been on the bench now for a couple of years, another new appointee. I have had a few cases with Judge Sceusi. I think he is, at least the cases I have had were domestic violence cases. I believe that is what he's currently doing. I don't know if that's what he's been doing the whole time, but that's normally where judges often start. Family judges will often start doing domestic violence cases. I've always found him very easygoing. Again, very soft-spoken, which is, you know, not unusual, but you would expect doing domestic violence cases. The nature of them can be so difficult and emotional that, sometimes you need a firmer rule in the courtroom. But I didn't find Judge Sceusi to have that to be the case with him. He manages his courtroom very, very well and calmly. He takes a lot of time to hear the cases, which, if there's a lot of cases, isn't always the best thing for a lawyer, because sometimes we're there for a great deal of time. But at least he lets the cases be heard, and you get to be heard, which is very important, especially in these areas of law. Judge Nancy Sivilli, she's been on the bench for 15 years. I think she's probably one of the youngest judges or younger judges on the bench. I believe she was appointed very early in her career also. And you'll see she started practicing in 1983 and was moved to the bench in 99. It's not a significant amount of time. I probably have the most experience with her, even though she hasn't been around for that long compared to some of the other judges. What I've always found from Judge Sivilli is she puts in the extra time and work that's needed to move cases along and to make sure cases are handled right. I had one case with her many, many years ago that I'll never forget because the way she handled it was extraordinary and very unusual. It was a custody issue, and I don't remember the exact issue any longer, but it required her to interview a teenage child, which is something most judges don't really want to do. It's not good for the children. It's not good for the relationship. So judges, will do what they can to avoid that when they can. But this was obviously a case where we weren't able to. But instead of having the child come into a courtroom, which is very formal and often intimidating, and your parents are both there, the judge actually went, and I believe it was even after hours, to meet this girl in a restaurant, like a pizza place, to sit and just talk with her. And I'm sure even now, and this was a long time ago, they probably couldn't even do that now because there's all new rules about risk management and liability and things like that. But for a judge to take her time after work to go and make this girl comfortable, to really find out how she could help, was just remarkable. I'm sure given the opportunity, many judges would do that, but many don't get that opportunity. So, the fact that she took it really said a lot about how she handles her cases. And one thing that I believe is unique about Judge Sivilli, at least in Essex County, is she issues tentative decisions to her motions, which means if you schedule a motion in a case, and she handles divorce cases, and most of your work in a divorce is going to be by motion. Most things happen through motion. So you have a motion filed, you get oral argument on a certain given Friday. She will give you an opinion on Wednesday or Thursday in writing of what she anticipates her decision to be. And she gives you the opportunity to accept it or reject it. So if you accept it and both sides accept it, you don't have to go to the argument on Friday. Now, what's good about this as an attorney, many things. One is you get to save your client legal fees if you can accept the decision and not go to the argument. And even if you're not happy with the decision, most of the time you're going to accept it, because if the judge says this is likely to be her decision, it's not common that you're going to do something substantially to change that opinion, because you cannot argue anything but what was in your motion papers in the first place. Since she gave you a decision, it suggests that she's already gone through that, and nothing you can say is going to be different than what she's already reviewed. But it does give you the opportunity to see if she maybe misses a point or misunderstands a point. And even if she doesn't misunderstand or miss a point and you still want to argue your position, at least you know what you're arguing against. You can go in there and focus just on what's important to explain to the judge, just what's important to point out to her. So it's sort of like knowing what the judge is thinking before you have to get up and make your point, which is really great. I wish all judges would do that. I think it would save everybody a lot of time. And even whether or not you go in or not to arguments, at least the arguments would be a lot less time consuming. Next is Judge James Triano. This is the only picture I can find of him. This is not, either it's not him or it's not how he looks now. It may be like a picture from when he first started practice, but his hair is white or gray now. But getting back to him, so he has retired. He was appointed in '92, but he did recently retired. He was recalled in 2014 for a 2-year term, which obviously he's still sitting for. His background is apparently all private practice, which I do find surprising. Again, it's I think less common now, but with the judges who have been around for 20 years or so, it may not have been as uncommon as we see with some of the other judges we refer. But now you'll see the newer judges often have more governmental positions and backgrounds that they bring to before coming into practice. Not many go directly from a private practice into the bench. Although Judge Serrano was around for many, many years, I only had a handful of cases. He primarily did juvenile cases, which are family law cases, but they're really criminal in nature, and that's not something my practice or I ever did much of. But I did have one with him, and he was really remarkable. It was a case where I had a kid who was kind of on the fence of becoming like either a really good kid or a really bad kid. And that's pretty much what I said to the judge, and I urged him to give the boy a second chance, and he did. And really made a difference in this kid's life because I've represented his mother in other cases in the future and found out he's actually done very well. And to Judge Toronto's commend, he really did help this boy out and really made a difference in his life. I also had one divorce case I recall lasted about 10 years after judgment because it was just something that was ongoing. But he's a little less. I don't want to say that he's short on the bench. He will not put up with as much as other judges will. He will stop the arguments when they are unnecessary. And unfortunately, as I'm sure most of you know, lawyers sometimes argue more than they should. The first thing I learned as an intern in law school was a good lawyer knows when not to argue. Fortunately, not everybody's learned that. So George Toronto is one of the people who won't just let you argue because your client's there. If you're arguing a point that doesn't need to be argued, or you're arguing something that's not in the best of faith, he will cut it short. And I think that's good. I think that's needed in most courtrooms. Judge Kathy Wasserman, she's been on the bench now for about 4 years. I think she's doing FD cases, again, the non-dissolution, child support visitation. I've only had a couple cases with her. I was actually surprised in my research that she's only been on the bench for about 4 years because I thought my cases with her were even further back than that. But I obviously am mistaken. She's not very strict. She's strict but polite. Off the bench, if you see her in the hallway, she's nice and charming and pleasant. But on the bench, she takes a little bit harder of a stance than some other judges would. I think in an attempt to move cases. If she is doing FD cases, she's going to have a high volume of cases. She needs to move a lot. So I think that is geared towards helping move those cases along. And believe me, if you're one of 50 cases in a courtroom, you'll be happy if that's the case. Next is Judge Ronald Wigler, appointed in 2010. He's been there for about 4 years too. You'll see in his experience, he was in the U.S. Attorney General, U.S. Attorney's Office also. Again, I think that's more of the common stepping stone. I haven't had any cases that I can recall with this judge, and on my search, my database didn't disclose anything. So again, unfortunately, I don't really have anything to offer you except for his educational and prior experience background. Hopefully, if you have a case with him, this will be of some help to you. Judge Daniel Yablonsky, sorry. He's been on the bench for about 3 years in the family division, I believe, the whole time. You see, he was in private practice in bankruptcy, which is very unique. I've never come across any judges that, and I think his practice was largely concentrated in bankruptcy. Because my only experience with this judge that I recall, I mean, I did have 1 or 2 cases with him, but I didn't really have any interaction in those cases. But I did have cases when he was in as a bankruptcy practitioner, because unfortunately, bankruptcy often gets involved in family law cases, divorce cases a lot. But I don't have any recollections of my cases with him. which is probably a good thing. It means he just handles his courtroom, simply, and you go in, you handle your case, and you leave. It's the judges that do well or bad before you that you tend to recall more. So I don't really have much to offer you with this judge either. So again, if anybody that is listening or does listen to this, if you could send me some information, I'd really appreciate it. So that's it for the judges. Give me a minute to shut the tapes off, and I'll start taking questions again. I want to remind you that the questions are not seen by others, so you feel free to to post anything that you have or that you're curious to know about.